Hello, thank you for joining us. Todd, thank you for the introduction. I'm Jeff Stelmach. I am the global president for Spiro, and Spiro is one of the world's largest experiential marketing agencies. And we have a little change of pace. Instead of talking about rosé, we're going to talk about whiskey today. Before we jump in, I'd like John and Josh, tell us a little bit more about yourselves and your role.
I'm John Williams. I work for Diageo, the world's largest premium drinks company, and I look after our Scotch brands globally.
Josh.
Hello, Josh Braithwaite, Managing Director of Creative. I work for GALE, an integrated business agency based out of New York, where world-class consultancy meets world-class creativity.
Thank you. All right, we're going to dive right in, and we're going to talk about a special brand, Buchanan's, a whiskey made in Scotland, but beloved by all of Latin America. So, John, tell us a little bit more about the brand.
Yeah, I'd love to. So for those of you who don't know anything about Buchanan's, it's actually the world's 6th biggest Scotch brand. It's Diageo's 2nd biggest Scotch brand. And it's got such an interesting backstory because when it was created, I think over 160 years ago by our founder, James Buchanan, he spotted a gap in the market. He wanted to create a lighter, smoother, easier drinking whiskey, specifically for export. And when it first landed in the shores of Latin America in 1867, it really took off. So the way we talk about it at Diageo, it's a whiskey with a Scottish accent, but a Latin soul.
I love it. When you have a brand of 160 years of legacy and history, yet you're creating a new brand transition, and you're moving through. Why are we doing that now? What led you to make that transition happen?
Well, we're at Diageo because we have the collection of the world's most important scotches, including Johnnie Walker. We're on a mission to transform the image of the category generally. And it's a multi-year and multifaceted transformation journey, because if you imagine in your mind's eye, everything that has, built this amazing Scotch category, the foundations which was built on like status, its aspiration, its specialness, but at the same time, the user imagery and occasion that is associated with that, it has just become increasingly disconnected from culture today. So, and Buchanan's is exactly the same position. So if you look at any of the Buchanan's legacy work, you'll see a male, a white male usually, on his own in a dark place, on a leather couch or leather sofa, on the rocks. And then that has been incredibly successful for the category and for us for a while. But as I say, it's just disconnected from the world that we're in today. And so that obviously was a trigger for us to look for a completely new approach to building the brand. And I guess the insight and the trigger for the journey we went on and then partnered with GALE on was an aha moment when we moved from a kind of brand out perspective to a consumer first perspective. I say brand out because we talked to ourselves a lot about, Buchanan stands for greatness. That's what we told ourselves. That's kind of the work that we put into the world, and that's what we thought consumers thought of the work. But actually, when you talk to them, what they said, what kind of warmed their hearts, what connected with them about Buchanan's was its generosity, its familiar nature, that it had an ability to connect cross-generation. So not at all this big, great, statusful image that we thought was what the brand stands for. So in this interesting, familiar, generous, cross-generational space, we thought there was something exciting and rich in there from which to take the brand forward and make it relevant for today.
It sounds terrific. And Josh, I'm going to ask you to talk about the campaign, but to tee you up, I'd like to run a video so we can show a few of the items that are part of this new campaign and transition for the brand. Let's play the video.
This year, Buchanan's shook up old category standards and stirred a revolution. by embracing the spirit of the next generation of whiskey drinkers.
Dicen, pero no la verdad. Solo digo cosas que nadie habla. La cara de la calle soy la para de los tipos de la mara. Antes dudo que cantara, pero ahora cantaré.
No surprise, the work's beautiful. But Josh, tell us about the strategy behind it.
Thanks, yeah, literally hot off the press. I think it came out about a month ago. Look, like John said, you know, whiskey's a really interesting category in that most brands, including Buchanan's, have been around a really long time. And really it started with the shift. Instead of like looking at our brand, it was really about looking towards the consumer and digging deep, deep, deep into those audience insights. So it's first and foremost, from a strategic perspective, it's about being true to the brand. And I think Buchanan's historically has been around generosity, gatherings, family aspect. But we needed to find a modern audience insight, right, that propelled this brand into this century. And so we dug into the audience deeply, and admittedly, it took quite a while to find a modern insight. And what we found is some interesting data points, like across LATAM, that started to percolate. Some interesting tidbits, like birth rates are going down, like across Colombia, Mexico, a global insight that's happening everywhere. And then in the first time in like the last 3-4 years, you've seen a lot of emigration across the continent, almost doubled. We thought this is like really interesting. Okay, so people are leaving their core family, you know, especially in a part of the world where family is incredibly important. And so, you know, we dug more, spoke to like a lot of consumers, and what we found is like, okay, so people are seeking opportunities away from their core family, moving to cities where there are more opportunities, and creating new families of their own. That include, you know, those that aren't necessarily blood related, friends, work colleagues, people like within their neighborhood. And so we saw this interesting movement happening, what we call the rise of the chosen familia, which is, yes, you have your blood family, but there is also a chosen one. And again, in Latin America, as I mentioned, families are important everywhere, but particularly in this continent and in this culture, it's incredibly important. And so we found this insight of the chosen familia, which was the core insight that drove the new platform Stelmach and Familia, which loosely translates in English to gather around. And that was the nucleus, like, of the new Buchanan's brand.
Spectacular. I know that any kind of a campaign needs something to be at its tentpole, and Bizarrap is at the center of your campaign here. Why'd you get to choose working with him?
Yeah, I mean, Bizarrap is up here. For those who don't know, the most watched, the most streamed musical artist on YouTube. He's an Argentinian producer, and he collaborates like with a lot of artists, not just in that part of the world, but across the world. Folks like Shakira, folks like Peso Pluma. And what's really interesting is he kind of just like took off over COVID. He's this really interesting bedroom producer, literally makes his music inside his house. We thought that's really interesting, you know, in that his creative process is about really like creating his own chosen familia of artists and collaborators. So he would invite Shakira or invite Peso Pluma over to his house, into his bedroom, and that's where they would create music. So we're like, wow, he's actually like living this insight himself in his own like music chosen familia. And it also helps that, you know, he gets 50, 60 million views every time his music session drops as well. And so we decided to collaborate with him, lived and breathed the ethos, a true like global phenomenon as well. And as well, like his ecosystem around him, where he's dropping music session drops on YouTube out of the blue, dropping teasers. He really reels in this audience in a really modern and dynamic way. And again, part of the business problem was dusting a little dust off the brand here. So it was a little bit of a shortcut to help us, like, again, turn the corner into a more modern brand.
Well, when you have something that strong, Bizarrap, the most popular, most viewed artist on all of YouTube, it can become the part that you really lean on. So, but you have to connect with the culture, you have to be really authentic. How do you move beyond a hero video when you have such a brave, strong talent that you could lean on completely?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I think, unfortunately, you can't brand build just on a 30-second video these days, as fun as that was. But you mentioned it. It was really about leveraging the ecosystem of BizRap and launching the brand through culture and entertainment. For those people that don't know and maybe don't follow BizRap and his music session drops, so it's he keeps it a secret who he's about to collaborate with. He puts these teasers out into the world, and it was really about infusing the Buchanan's brand authentically in the way that he drops content and culture, and that's exactly what we did. So we worked with his team, and BizRap, again, kindly put the brand in his teasers. He integrated it. You saw a snippet there in his music session drop in his bedroom studio. So it was like a seamless integration between the brand and BizRap's brand, and I think that's what made it so successful.
John, I know it's early days, but how are you measuring success? How do you know if your transformation's really moving the needle for your brand the way you want it to?
Yeah, I mean, well, it is early days, and I am a big believer that when you are transforming a category or brand in the way we're doing with Scotch and the way we're doing with Buchanan's, you do not flick a light switch and work with a great partner like we are in BizRap and of course with GALE and go, yeah, it's done, job done, because it is a multi-year, multifaceted journey of one that requires commitment and consistency, investment, of course, and actually requires us to look at all aspects of the marketing mix, which we're doing. However, when we started to work together, you will remember a famous meeting when we were talking specifically about getting this journey underway. It was like we want a head snap moment, right? We want to punctuate, I guess, where we are and have many people suddenly go, Buchanan's, new Buchanan's. So where we are today, I mean, you saw some of the stats with the video. I mean, the amount of views we've had, the amount of engagement we had, 90% positive sentiment, of course. As a big business, we do pre-testing and post-testing. We're absolutely delighted with what we're learning so far. So really excited about committing and continuing with the journey. Ultimately, we'll measure success by how many new generation drinkers we're recruiting, and we'll know we're doing that by shifting the needle on brand meaning and brand distinctivity, because as we mentioned right at the beginning, Buchanan's is an incredibly well-known brand, specifically in Latin America, so we've got a great salience, great awareness, but we just need to turn that awareness through a campaign like this into love and distinctivity. But yeah, early days, but feeling really excited to continue on this path together. Yeah.
I just want to say I'm going to totally steal head snap moment.
Yeah.
That's mine now. Tell me a little bit more. I mean, Buchanan's has 160 years. How does this campaign work with the legacy and the history that exists for Buchanan? How they mesh together?
Yeah. Well, firstly, it's kind of amusing to me. I think, are we calling this like a brand transformation fireside chat? I'm sure transformation was somewhere in the brief. And it kind of makes me smile to myself. And that might just be insight into me that nobody needs to know. Because we do talk about transformation a lot in marketing with brands. And this truly is a transformation. And yet, you could look at the work and go, that has nothing to do with the work that that you did 5 years ago or 10 years ago. But that isn't actually true, because that's just a kind of superficial look at it. When you put yourself in the consumer's shoes, which we do, essentially what we've done is taken what's very true and very beloved of the brand, i.e. its familiarity, its ability to bring people together, and reimagine it for today through the chosen familia. So it's recognizable from that perspective. Importantly, at the same time, we also did a lot of work on decoding what are the most recognizable key brand assets. Because, you know, when you have the wonder and luxury of working on a brand which is 160 plus years old, over that time, you build really strong memory structures for consumers. So if you look at the brand, look at the green world that it lives in, look at the cantina style bottle, which is really distinctive, the red seal. We built on all of those things, which you would have seen in work that we did, 50 years ago, but we, again, reimagined them for today and made them feel more vibrant and relevant.
Well, it's a beautiful campaign. It's a smart campaign. It makes your head snap. And it really...
Your head is snapped?
It head
Good.
snapped. And it has a fantastic truth, and that's family. Whether it's the family you were born into or the family you create, it's really at the center of everyone's most important thing. So I think it's really brilliant, and I thank you for sharing it with us today. I want to look to the audience while we have some time here to see if there's any questions we'd like to bring to Josh and John. Any questions? Go ahead.
Sure.
Down front. Do we have a microphone? Here. Oh, there's our microphone.
So what advice would you give to brands who are looking to engage with modern Latin American audiences today?
Do you want me to start with
John,
that?
Josh, over to you.
Probably don't start talking to me. I will be the first to admit, when I remember that, you always remember like times, places, meetings, situations you're in when you're going through like this process, working with great partners. And I'm like, bizarre what? Bizarre, like, how do you spell it? Like, who is he? Who is she? I don't know. Furiously Googling. Obviously, the truth is, you start with your audience. You start with your audience, you start with your consumer. I guess that it sounds so obvious, but it's really important to put yourself into their world, their lives, their hopes, their dreams, their fears, their passions, importantly, their interests, who they're listening to in this instance, what they're talking about. And less so a guy like me and what he does or doesn't know about culture generally or Latin culture.
Yeah, I think, well, first and foremost, like, we've got a very global team, and I think representation in 2024 can't be overstated, so start there. But then we have a very global team across Diageo and across GALE, and from folks from all over the world, obviously including Latin America. But as John mentioned, I mean, just dig in, get to know your audience, their values, where they're going, what they're doing, how they're thinking. And then the last thing that I'd say is what was really apparent, I think, on this 2-year journey is Latin American culture is global culture. So even if you're not tapping into a Latin audience, like, Latin culture is everywhere, especially like modern culture when you look across music, food, fashion. Like, they really are on the cutting edge of creating that culture, not just in that part of the world, but everywhere.
All right, let's look to the audience for one more question. Please.
Is this working? Yeah, great.
Yeah.
You mentioned the head snapping campaign you have and reaching consumers, and when you look at Diageo and your brands, in many ways they're lifestyle brands. You want to be part of the culture. How do you bring experience? Do you bring experiential? How does experiential fit into your marketing mix in terms of engaging consumers and communities?
Oh, it's an incredibly important part of the marketing mix. I mean, at the end of the day, we define our business as our company purpose is celebrating life every day, everywhere. We bring people together. We bring people together in milestone occasions to celebrate through the highs and through the lows of their lives. Hopefully more of the highs. So what we do from an experiential perspective, what we do in the on-trade, which is an incredibly critical challenge and opportunity for us, is always at the heart of what we do. It will always start with what's happening at the bar, what's happening with the bartender, what's happening with the serve. It's front and center of everything that we do.
I would just add, from a general marketing, coming from the experiential world, it's one of the ways you can actually make any campaign the most authentic, is by giving a real three-dimensional experience of your campaign and of your brand essence. And, well, that's also my business, so that's why I think that. Are there any other questions in the audience here? One more here.
There are a lot of legacy brands at Cannes trying to figure out ways to become modern. What's the one thing that you would tell them as they start on that process?
I think the cheat code for transforming any legacy brand, particularly one as old as Buchanan's, is just dig into who they are, right? Because what made them successful once, whether that's 160 years ago, will make them successful again, the roots of that. But the unleash and the transform is just finding like a modern way to bring that to life. I'll give you a little story, and it was kind of like staring us in the face. John mentioned it. Buchanan's has a very unique shape to its bottle. It's actually in the shape of a canteen, you know, intentionally. It's that shape of the canteens that were in World War I, where they would fill them with water and the soldiers would literally pass them around. You know? And I was like, wow, so this brand's about generosity and literally gathering around. And we just had to find like a modern insight, back to the chosen familiar insight, that gave that new freshness and new life. So it's really about getting to the root of who the brand is. And when you understand that, nothing feels inauthentic.
Yeah, I mean, I can only echo everything you say. It's being really true to what's inherent in the brand, the brand's DNA. But from a consumer perspective, I mentioned earlier, we had a notion of how, because we built the brand on greatness and what greatness means in the world back then. And I think that might have been part of the first brief.
It was.
Probably.
Thank you.
Because this didn't happen
Apparently.
overnight. We won't talk too much about that, but this is a long, interesting, but fantastic journey. So the DNA from the consumer's perspective. It sounds, obvious, but we all know the moment where we become so close to our own stuff that it can get cloudy. Quite literally in Cannes, who knew, but cloudy, so, clear out the cobwebs, get really consumer true to what's inherent in the DNA. I always love that to be a positive truth. It is easy in transformation, legacy to like be, bad, old, fusty, dusty. You can find lots of that truth. I don't think that's a great start point or source. So, an honest but positive consumer-led source of the DNA, and then and so that comes from a leadership perspective, the requirement to be respectful, but critically, then you have the bravery to go, well, what does that mean today and in the future? Importantly, and therefore, what's the bandwidth of the quote-unquote transformation in order to get the head snap, to get the reframe? And that does require bravery when you're working on a category like Scotch, which is 200 plus years old, on a brand like Buchanan's, which is 160 plus years old, which is incredibly important from a financial perspective, from a business like mine, right? So you're like on this tightrope of like, I'm going to be respectful, but I'm going to be bring it up to date, and you just go on that tightrope, and it doesn't come easy, and it doesn't happen overnight. So you have to work with amazing partners like we have in GALE, who will go through the blood, sweat, and tears of that, the highs and the lows, and sometimes the anxieties, the learnings, learnings that lead to you taking a different direction, like we did in this instance, because we spent a long while trying to reimagine greatness, and every time we tried to reimagine it, it just felt like greatness. Which, so yeah, that's my advice.
Terrific. Well, I appreciate your generosity of your time and your story. And part of being generous is sharing. So it's very nice for John to have brought several bottles of Buchanan that are up on the bar and available for us to sample here today.
And it is midday, so
Yeah.
It's almost
fine.
12. You're fine.
12 o'clock, 5 o'clock somewhere, and
It
that's
is
now
midday.
here. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.